We ended up 6 weeks later, shook hands at 3.75 million.
Okay, we're rolling. Welcome everybody to another episode of Irish Success Podcast. And today we have a Gavin J Gallagher, who's a property investor and businessman. How are you, Gavin?
I'm very good, thank you, Lucas.
Well done, well done. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is it that you do? Tell people, and then we're going to jump into your story because it's quite a bit of a story there.
Yeah, I'm a real estate, property investor, I suppose is an easier way of saying. And currently today, I run East Point Business Park. And East Point is, it's a business park out at the entrance of the port tunnel. And we've built it over the last 20 years. So we bought a landfill site and we turned it into a business park, basically.
That's a big investment there.
There's a bit of an investment, all right, and so but I've also then there was the downturn in 2008, and I was traveling, and so I spent about 7-8 years abroad as well. So I've lived and I've worked in Africa, the Middle East, America, the south of Spain, like all over the place, basically. So I spent a couple of years on the run, and it was good.
Finding yourself, let's say.
Yeah, finding myself, exactly.
That's what they say. Hey, could you tell us the story? Because can you walk us through the story of when you were working through the Celtic Tiger, through the boom, and then the recession? What happened? Tell us a little bit of the story about that.
Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go back a little bit because I studied architecture, and I came out, I wanted to, I went to New York City on a holiday with my parents, like as a teenager years ago. And when I was on that holiday, I was just spent the entire time looking up at the skyscrapers, and it was like one of those kind of moments in life where you kind of go, now I know what I want to do. I want to build buildings, and like big buildings like this, So that was the kind of moment. And prior to that, I was this feckless kind of student in school. Like I was always getting like 1 out of 50 spelling tests, and so I was just really bad. Like I was not. I was just the worst kid. I think I had ADHD and just couldn't concentrate and all that. And then suddenly, when I knew what I wanted to do, 100% laser focus, and I had to go and get a certain amount of points for my leaving cert to be able to do architecture, and so. Really put the head down. It was the first time I realized that I actually had the ability to concentrate when I had something to kind of target.
When you had a goal.
When I had a goal. Prior to that, it was like, no interest at all.
This is so common, yeah.
And so, anyway, went and studied architecture, studied hard to get into architecture. Architecture is not an easy course to get into, but I managed to get in just, by the skin of my teeth. Did first year, did second year, and then just as I was starting third year, my father died. And he was a young man. It was very unexpected. But he died at the age of 45. Wow. And I had just turned literally 21. And so suddenly it's kind of like, whoa, this is, life-changing event, obviously. Big. Now, I decided to stay doing architecture, but at the same time, I started obviously getting involved in whatever my dad had been involved in. I had to kind of start rolling up my sleeves and get involved in all that kind of stuff. So there was an introduction, like a baptism of fire into the business sort of sector, to go from being, this architect who I wanted to do nice pictures and stuff to suddenly, hardcore kind of business stuff and bank loans and, kind of risk management and property and all this kind of stuff. So it was a kind of a baptism of fire, and started becoming kind of really into the whole thing, just, because it was survival. I had a younger brother and a younger sister, and my mother had absolutely no business sense at all. Like she had never studied.
And what about your father? Was he a business?
He was a businessman, and he had a lot of, he had been involved in house building for many years, and then he sold that company, and then he was a bit of an investor, and he invested in people. So he invested in a couple of companies, and he had started building a couple of things as well. So he had actually started a lot of the stuff that I'm involved in today. But when he died, it was suddenly, survival, because he died in 1993, and this was shortly after there was a kind of a crash, and there was the currency crisis in the UK and stuff. And what happened was interest rates went up. Like, this is back in the day when your mortgage on your home was 16%. So I can remember seeing, you kind of, your dad has died in hospital. For the last 3 months, you've been going into the hospital. The post has been piling up, because you kind of think, well, as soon as dad gets out of hospital, he'll deal with his post. but suddenly he's dead, and then you're there, right, I guess I had better open this post. So start opening it, and you see, letters from the bank saying you haven't paid your mortgage. It's like, 16%, all this kind of stuff. So it was a really difficult time. Had to sell some of the interests that Dad had been involved in. And there was a couple of things then that he had that we decided, you know what, we're going to keep these and try to make them work, And so it was like that for a while. But at the same time, I studied architecture, and I kind of said to myself, one of the bits of advice that my dad kind of said to me is, don't ever work for the family business, because no one will ever respect you if they think that it was all just given to you. Do you know what I mean? And he said, so do your own thing. I'm not going to be giving you.
Such a great advice.
Well, this is the thing. And the thing is he had been through that as well. Like his dad had been a house builder and stuff like that. And he went into the family business. And when he went into the family business, everyone assumes, sure, it's easy.
Daddy's money.
It's daddy's money. It's easy for you. Yeah. And the thing is you might work your ass off, but everyone around you thinks that you got it easy, right? So he said, Gavin, do not assume that you're going to inherit anything. You are to go and start your own business and do your own thing. And he says, get your own qualifications and stuff like that. So I said, fair enough. Let's do that. So I studied architecture, got an architecture degree, and then I worked for a year or two for one of the bigger firms. And as soon as I was finished, I thought I had loads of experience with like a year of work in an architect's firm. And I said, okay, now I'm starting my own business.
Oh,
but what I'm going to do is I'm going to combine architecture with development. And I thought I could manage both of these things. Okay, I could be an architect at one hand, and I could also buy property and develop it. And I would use my architectural brain to kind of like develop these nice buildings and stuff. So that was my idea. And it
sounds like a good plan.
It sounds like a good plan, But I'll tell you what happened. I got my first job. My first job was a house extension for a couple. Okay. And this couple had, like everybody, you have a finite budget. It's only a small budget, and yet you want to do as nice of a job as possible. So I did the best I could for them with the budget that they gave me. And they kept on making little changes here and there, and it ended up kind of being a lot more expensive. And I can remember my fee for all this work, and I worked for months on it, was £8,000, Irish pounds at the time, which is around €10,000, And I spent literally 9 months, and that was the only job I had for 9 months, for 10 grand. And at the same time, I had bought a small little piece of land on the west of Ireland for 25 grand. And that 25 grand that I invested, I used my architectural skills to go and get planning permission on that piece of land to build 4 houses. And then I spoke to a local estate agent, and I said, can you introduce me to a builder who will actually build this for me? And he said, no problem, leave it with me. A few days later, he said, listen, I spoke to a builder, but he doesn't want to work for you. He wants to buy the site off you. And I was like, but I'm going to be a developer. I wanted... And he said, well, he's going to pay you 125 grand if you're interested. And I was like, huh? Like 125 grand. So I had worked 9 months for 8 grand. And this, in 6 weeks, I'd made 100 grand. And I was like, I got architecture over here, and I got the property business over here. I think my time management, it would be better spent in the property stuff. So I basically shut down my architectural business at that point. Now, I kind of always thought, it's still up there in the head, so I can use it but I'll use it for my own personal projects. And so I started getting in. So I took that profit, rolled it into another deal, and it was the Celtic Tiger. So things were going crazy. So that 100 grand that I made there, I put into a deal, leveraged it up by borrowing money from the bank, and I bought a thing out in Clondalkin, and for what I bought for 800 grand, with the 100 grand of cash, 700 grand borrowed from the bank, and I turned that into about a 2.7 million profit. Not a profit, sold the entire thing for that.
Well, your success recipe seems very clean, because there was this small site that you bought for 25, sold it for 125, used that money to finance something for close to a mil, and then that made you 2.7. So.
Yeah, and this is and the thing is it kept going like that, okay, and that was the beauty. And at the same time, the curse of the 2000, Celtic Tiger kind of rise is because it was so easy that you started to get a little bit complacent, and you started to think that this is easy. Like in my mind, I had figured out the secret formula to making millions. Okay, I did it again made millions. Did it again, made millions. I did a deal in Clondalkin actually, and I bought a property, and I can remember I thought I was going to go and build out the property. I was going to do, I was going to extend it, do all this kind of stuff.
Was it commercial or domestic?
It was commercial, and I only really did commercial because I found that much more valuable.
Yeah.
And but I bought this property. I paid. I offered 950. I ended up closing the deal at 1.25. Okay, and I closed the deal. It was around about like the week before Christmas that I closed this deal. Took my Christmas holidays. January started kind of like, working, okay, we better go and get to work on this project, because it's a lot of money borrowed now, over $1 million. And this guy comes along, an agent that I kind of knew, and he said, did you buy that property in Clondalkin? I said, yeah, I did. He goes, you're not going to believe it. He says, I'm working for the guy who wants to buy it from you. And I said, not for sale. It's like, I've got big plans for this thing. And we ended up 6 weeks later, shook hands at 3.75 million. And so 6 weeks, 2.5 million profit.
No
and it
way.
was insane time. Now, the thing is you say that and you kind of think, my God, like, you can do anything. It's like Grant Cardone here. Do you know what I mean? And so
the time was just unbelievable for that.
And the thing is, I put no cash into that deal. I borrowed every penny of the 1.25. So it was 1.25 million made on no capital down of my own. Do you know what I mean? So it's just money coming from the sky, basically. And it was probably the worst thing that happened in a sense, because what it did was it went to the head, and next minute I bought a penthouse in New York City. I bought a brand new Audi RS4. I bought, it was just like money was like this life. I figured it out. I know how to become I'm going to make 100 million in the next couple of years.
Ultra rich.
I'm going to be ultra rich. I had people from NetJets calling me, in the private jet company, saying, would you like to go and buy one of these cards and you can have the private jet whenever you want and all this. And it was kind of like crazy, because I hadn't seen any losses for a period of like 4 or 5 years. I kind of thought that there will be no losses. And then 2008 hit me, and it was like a train wreck, like right in the face. And I decided I was going to buy a property in Spain. And I kind of thought to myself, you know what? I'm doing everything too small. I'm working on projects here in Ireland that are kind of like small neighborhood centres, and I'm making 2 million profit. Why don't I do something big and make a 20 million profit? And so I found a project in the south of Spain. And if you know Marbella area.
Oh, yeah. Fancy schmancy.
Porta Banús, all that kind of stuff. So Porta Banús was the kind of the inspiration, where you've got the Ferraris and the Lambos and all this. And you've got the Gucci shops and the Prada and all that. And I saw that, and I can remember sort of saying, it's got that kind of feel to it. But at night, you've got all of these kind of seedy bars and stuff like that. And it's kind of down market in the nighttime, where everyone's kind of getting drunk and stuff. And I thought, what if you were to get that fancy kind of, all the fancy cars and all the fancy shops, and put them in a really well-controlled place that didn't have that kind of seedy bars and stuff like that? And I thought that would be perfect. So I went and I found a place that could do that. And I invested 42 million in this property. And the idea, and what it was 12 million came from myself and a bunch of investors, 30 million came from the banks, and we went and we closed this deal. And it didn't go well. Let's just say the week that I closed the deal, Lehman Brothers collapsed, and suddenly you're into this thing where literally every news program is about the collapse of the world. The banking system is collapsing, this and that and the other. And so basically, what I thought was going to make, like, I bought that 42 million. I actually had documents and projections and stuff saying that was going to be worth 85 million within about 5 years. So I thought I was going to make all this money. And then suddenly, instead of it being 80, it was basically like a hole in the ground. I just thrown money into it. And that project, after about 5 years of trying to make it survive, complete loss, 100% loss on the property. And so that was just one deal.
Imagine if you were late 2 weeks with the decision, you probably wouldn't have bought it.
Yeah, the thing is what was really interesting is at the time, the guys that were selling it to me, there was some delay, and I can't remember exactly what it was, and it was their fault, the delay. So they said, do you want to get out? He says, it's fine. We'll give you back your money. You can walk away if you want to get out. And I was thinking to myself, are you kidding? I'm going to make 20 million on this deal. No, I don't want to get out. And I thought like that they were offering it back to me because they had a better, somebody else was going to buy it or something. So I decided, no, let me in on that deal, And when I look back now, I think to myself, what on earth was I thinking? I should have taken the money. But this is the thing, is you and that is one of the big things that I try to
So that was in Spain. So that was the south of Spain. That
Yeah.
was a big job. What did you have going in here? Did you have something going here at the same time?
Tons of stuff, yeah.
Tons of
like
stuff as well.
I had like the thing is, and this is the problem with when it's all coming so quickly, you start to kind of think that you can do everything at once, And so I had built up a team, and I had about 6 people working for me in an office in the city, in the centre of Dublin, and they were basically my management team that were going to kind of do all the projects. And I moved to Spain, so I was going to be the guy that lived in Spain, was working on this big project in Spain, but had all of my Irish projects being managed by the team in Ireland. And I would fly back and forth, every fortnight kind of a thing. And it sounded great in theory, but then when I was down in Spain and you realise, God, the amount of travelling I'm doing, it's like I'm spending more time in the airport than I am actually getting work done,
Did you fly private?
No, I never bothered with any of that in the end. But I remember, like, it was, what I used to, Aer Lingus the plane used to come in from America, and they would immediately turn it around and fly to Malaga. So you always had the kind of the business class section up the front. So you'd always pay the extra €60 or €70, and you'd get the business class seats, but for 2 hours. Like, so it wasn't quite the same thing. But the problem is that all of that kind of success went to the head, and suddenly you become far less, you started doing things on gut instinct, as opposed to if this was your first deal, you would have spent hours going over every single, you would have said, hold on a sec, I need more information on this. And I was kind of like, yeah, look, it's fine. Trust
It'll
me,
work.
it's going to work.
Work.
And I've seen this before. And of course, that's where the biggest thing is your ego. So like with the podcast that I started 2 years ago, I talk all about your ego.
Could you share with the audience your podcast?
Yeah, I have.
Gavin is running his own gig as well.
I have a podcast called Behind the Facade, and I talk exclusively pretty much about the mindset and all that, and the behaviors and the habits and stuff that you need in order to be a good property investor. And the idea is just that you always have to remember that your next big loss maker is just around the corner. And if you always remind yourself of that, like every deal you do, you want it to be a success. And every deal I did, I thought it was going to be a huge success. But there was some aspect of it goes wrong, not in your control, totally unforeseeable, and it comes out of the blue, and next minute you're like on the back foot. So there was a couple of deals that I did that I'm not proud of them now, but at the time I thought I was going to double my money, ended up taking a loss.
And did you ever study any people who did property, or was it just kind of wing and stuff, Because right now, if people are getting into property, they'd be listening to guys like, well, if I was going to go into the commercial property, I'll be listening
I tell you, the thing is it's funny because I had a negative kind of a view. There was these guys that sell courses and stuff like that. Back in the day, I used to think, that's bullshit. Like, I can figure this stuff out. I don't need to pay some guy a couple of grand to teach me anything. I'll figure it out myself. Stupid, okay? Now I realize that the mistakes that I've made, I can help you avoid those mistakes. And the mistakes that I made cost me millions. If you have to pay me a few thousand to kind of join my course, isn't it worth paying that rather than losing millions and learn the lessons yourself? So that's the kind of the way I kind of I talk about it. But you're still going to have people who are skeptical, and you're still going to have people who kind of say, "No, I want to do it myself. I want to figure things out." But I just think that
it's silly.
It's so
silly.
So many people have been there before you, and they've made the mistakes and stuff like that. Learn from them. All you can do. So having someone, if I went through what I went through in 2000, if my dad had been alive, and he would have seen like what I was up to, he might have smacked me around and sort of said, "Cop onto yourself. You're not like Donald Trump or Grant Cardone or somebody like that. Don't be thinking that this is always going to keep going up. Like, there's going to be a point where it stops going up. And when that happens, the more you've got your lifestyle dialed into that kind of success and stuff, the bigger the fall happens to be, And that was the big thing, because I ended up 16 million negative. And so to go from, being worth millions and having literally millions coming in a year in income, suddenly you've got banks chasing you, and you're like literally you are negative millions, and
So
that was a really
like literally your private bank account had been nothing in it. Like was it
there
that?
was, you know what there was income coming in from properties, and it was coming into my bank account, but I had I had loans that I was supposed to be servicing, and I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to feed my kids and I'm going to pay the rent. I'm not going to be paying that loan because I just need this money for myself, basically, like to survive and stuff. And that's how you survived it. But that happened up until the day that the bank came in and locked that.
Knocked
And
on
then
the door.
they basically said, right, we're doing a full cash sweep. And what that meant was that every single penny that was coming in from those other properties that I had and stuff, that actually went diverted straight to them. So they didn't go into my bank account anymore. And that's when I hit rock bottom, when it was absolutely zero in the bank.
Wow.
And that was a moment now of like incredible, well, first of all, very humbling. You've gone from, you know, being offered private jet cards and stuff to suddenly like you're literally like penniless. And I mean, it was just the most challenging time. And it went on for about 2 years that I had to deal. The worst thing about it is that these falls, like from grace, you know, they don't happen instantly. It's like a death by 1,000 cuts. It's like first it starts with a little, you know, poke here and then a poke there and a poke there, and you keep on thinking that, oh, this is just the one, you know, this is only one bit of difficulty, but then another one comes along and it compounds and stuff. And I'll be quite honest, one of the reasons why I started my podcast is because I have friends who went through something similar and they didn't have the mental strength to deal with it and they took their own lives. And so I think that maybe the message that I have and the kind of the guidance that I can give might help people that are not as strong-minded to actually get through. You know, if you're facing that kind of thing, it can be a really dark place. You can
People should take a lesson from it because, listen, guy breaks up with a girl and he's about to take his own life in today's day and age. And here we have a guy who was worth millions down to minus 16 million.
Let me tell you what happened, okay? Marriage broke up. My marriage collapsed, okay? I lost the family home and I ended up 16 million negative, okay? So take those three back to back.
Jesus, I got goosebumps here.
And that was like very humbling, as you can imagine. But it didn't all happen on the first day. Do you know what I mean? It basically happened over a period of time.
Yeah, it was like step. Gavin, do you believe that things happen for a reason? Because if I look at my life, every single fuck up that happened to me, every single one of them, at the time, it was the worst thing that could happen to me. But now that I look at every single one of these things that happened to me bad, there was always a lesson in it.
Absolutely.
Long term.
Yeah. Like the thing is it's at the end of the day, everything that you go through in life, it's a matter of perspective. And if you look at something like, you know, well, at the time, I can tell you, I didn't think it was a good thing, okay?
Yeah.
But like when you're going through it, but when you look back now, I kind of say, do you know what? If that hadn't happened to me, where would I be now? Like I could, you know, you just wouldn't know like what, you could end up kind of on the side of the road, kind of like out of it in drugs or something like that. You just wouldn't know like what your life path, your life could have taken, you know? So from my point of view, I kind of look back and say, I have a valuable lesson to share now. I can actually help people and I can, you know, hopefully make a difference to some people in their lives and stuff like that. And it's an interesting story. It's like the roller coaster ride.
Yeah, so your story is amazing, going from that kind of thing. And plus you started from very little, you know.
You know, the funny thing is, one of the, like when I hit rock bottom, one of the things that I had to kind of say to myself, okay, Gavin, you've lost everything. Like there's like literally you're starting again. And I said, okay, what have I got going for me and how can I kind of start this thing again? I said, the one thing that I have is I have my knowledge and I have my network, okay? So there's a few things that people have. You have money or you don't, okay? You have your experience or you don't. In this case, I had a lot of experience. Then you have your network or you don't. In my case, I had a big network. I had tons of people around. I knew all this kind of stuff. And then the last thing you have is your time. And you either have time to work on this stuff or you don't have time to work on it. And so those are the 4 resources that you have. And you would basically look at the 4 of them and say, okay, which are the ones that I have? And those are the ones that I'm obviously going to try and leverage. And that the stuff that I don't have, I'm going to have to figure out how to overcome that. And maybe it means partnering with somebody who can actually bring in the money, you know, become a partner with somebody who actually can kind of get me to the next stage or whatever. And that was the kind of way that I looked at it. And I thought to myself, do you know what? Because there was a period of time when all this stuff was going bad for me. I was kind of blaming everyone else. I was kind of saying, you know what? F these guys in Lehman Brothers. It's their fault that the whole economy collapsed. And then F the Irish banks for coming after me the way they are. And F this and F that. And then you kind of, hold on a second. There's nobody to blame but yourself. It doesn't actually matter what happened. Like if Lehman Brothers didn't happen, something else might have happened. And to go and, if you go and blame everyone else, what you are is a victim, as opposed to a warrior who basically fights his way back out of it.
Key, yeah.
And that's the thing. And so after a period of licking my wounds and sort of blaming the world for all of this stuff, I suddenly went, you know what? There's nobody coming to rescue me. This is like the only person who's going to rescue you now is yourself, basically. And using your resources or your resource. Do you know what? It's never a lack of resources that's the problem. It's the lack of resourcefulness. And you have to figure out with what you have, what can you do with it, And that was basically, so I started partnering with people and we started getting, like at the time, the Irish market was on its knees. So there wasn't a lot to do. So I went to the Middle East. And when I was in the Middle East, I got involved.
Where in the Middle
I was in Dubai for about 18 months. And then I went from Dubai, I went to Qatar. And it was just after the World Cup had been awarded to Qatar. And so I said, I'll have a little bit of the billions that are kind of flowing in Qatar. So between the Middle East, that was kind of lucrative for a time and it allowed me to kind of pay bills and stuff. Then I went to Africa and I started working on a project in Ghana. And that was super exciting.
What kind of project?
It was a big bank. It was to basically build a big bank building for...
What was your job on that?
Well, I was kind of more like a development manager at that stage because I didn't have money to put into the project, but I had the network and the knowledge and the skills and basically I partnered with somebody who had the money and we kind of tried to put this project together with a big international bank. Now, in the end, it kind of got delayed and things like that. So I got started on the project, but I didn't stay with it because I wanted to kind of get on to other stuff. I went to the UK, started working in London for about 18 months. And during that period of time, I was over and back to Ireland on a regular basis. And you could start to see just the beginning of the return, like of growth to the Irish market. And so I said, it's starting to look like now might be the time to come back. So I came back and...
What year was it?
It was about 2015 that I came back.
That was the time to come back.
That was the time. That was the time when it all started kind of to kick off again. And I started what I had been doing in the UK. I was looking at student accommodation, and the UK has a massive student accommodation market, and like it's gone from student accommodation used to be bed sits and things like that where you just kind of rented out the front bedroom. In the UK, it became like a big institutional asset class where people built like hotels and it became like a student accommodation building. And so we started looking at that and saying, you know what's happened there is going to come to Ireland. And so that's what we did. So we started that process. And then I got involved basically with my family in East Point. My family, I had been, I had taken my dad's advice and I'd walked away from all of the family business and I wanted to kind of do my own stuff. But I thought to myself, you know what? I'm not so proud that I'm not prepared to go back in and actually kind of roll up my sleeves and get involved. And so all of the experience I gained, from the years abroad and stuff like that, like I had bought stuff in New York and things like that. So I had a really sort of global knowledge of business and also big network and stuff. So I thought I'll be useful working in the business park because there's an awful lot of really big investors that are based there that are US tech companies and stuff. So I can kind of talk with a lot of them. And so I actually really enjoy being involved in that. And so it is a challenging time now post-pandemic, but it is still...
You reckon?
It's challenging because so many of the companies, like you've heard Facebook have laid loads of people off and LinkedIn have laid loads of people off and Amazon are in the process of... So there's a big glut of unemployment. And so people are not looking to rent space at the moment. So it's starting to kind of become a little bit...
All the big offices and everything. Yeah, we do quite a couple of jobs for the big companies and our offices are empty.
That's the thing. And we've seen that. Like our business park, in 2019, there was about 8,000 people a day coming into the business park. And we have our own bus service and we would do about 3,500 people a day on our bus service at the time.
Wow.
And we had about 2,500 people driving their cars into the park. And all of that stuff, like pandemic, completely empty. And it was one of those things where you're kind of, this is different. This is not what we were expecting. And so now we've got this situation where everyone's talking about work from home, hybrid work, all this. So the world has changed. Like, the way people work is different now, And so anyway, it's just another challenge that we have
I
to.
believe the schooling will be like that pretty much soon. That's what they're talking in the WEF. They want to have kids on the iPads.
It wouldn't surprise me because I know my daughters. I have 5 kids, and so my eldest is doing her leaving cert at the moment, and she's in the institute. And the institute during the pandemic, like you basically you're sitting at home and you push a button and you're actually in the lecture hall with the lecturer, and so it's I mean the technology is fabulous.
It's probably not what it's gonna be because they reckon that when they bring the, what do they call it? Virtual reality sets, yeah. So it'll be literally like sitting here with with your headset, like literally sitting in the class.
There's 2 sides to it. I mean, I've looked at this from the point of view of trying to look at it from both sides because, like, I'm a landlord who wants people to rent my building. So obviously, I'm going to make an argument that you should be back in the office. However, when you're actually a business owner, if you're working from home and you never see your employees, you lose that bond with them. And there's a culture that you can develop. There's like a hard work, roll up your sleeves, kind of, come on, guys, let's go and get it.
Have here.
And I can see it when I walked in. And that is an attitude that if everyone's working from home, just sort of dissipates. And people are, click a button, you're looking at the screen. Oh, hi, Lucas, how's it going? And, there's no energy. It's not the same thing. And so I think that a lot of these big companies that have adopted this as a kind of, they have no choice but to adopt it at the time being. But I think they're going to suddenly realize, you know what, our culture has been badly damaged by this decision. And I think they're going to start thinking that, we should start bringing people back to the office.
Hopefully they will, because they might be saying, well, now we don't have to pay for the office, so we're saving a bunch of money.
There's that, but
might go that way.
What you'll do is the savings that you make on the office, you'll spend on the recruitment fees because you'll have to hire people after people leave.
Yes.
And I was speaking to somebody just on Friday, and their daughter has been working for about 2 years for a company. After she finished her leaving cert, or after she finished her university degree, she got a job. 2 years later, was her very first time going into the office building to meet like the people that basically are her colleagues and stuff. And she didn't know a single one of them. And she felt like a complete stranger walking in. And it just shows you, I mean, that's not how you should feel when you're walking into a building. You should be like, how's it going? It's great to see you. And, all of the kind of chat and the banter that people have sitting around the water cooler. I think that, that's the damage that is happening now. And I can see, what the traffic is so bad these days. I can understand why people would want to.
Yeah, it's even bad now. Imagine if they all come back into office work. It's going to be even worse because the traffic was never as bad as it is now, wasn't it?
It is. It's terrible. Of course, it's the winter and it's cold, so people aren't, cycling and all that kind of stuff. People are taking the car.
I have a list of questions here, so I want to jump into the property questions.
Sure.
You're the property man, So let's say you're doing a big deal. You have a couple of these deals going at the moment, as I see on your TikTok. What happens? This is something that's been bugging me. So I want to ask you this. So let's say you have a deal going. You're building something, commercial deal, blah blah blah. The budget is this and this, but then the price of materials triple in the time of the duration of the project. What happens then? The bank is giving you a certain amount of money. You have that in the back of your head. Okay, well, this is how much I have, blah, blah, blah. And then, boom, everything explodes.
Well, I mean, it's unlikely that you're going to get a tripling of the total budget. You're going to get a tripling of maybe components of it. And what you'll always have is, in a project, we'll always have a contingency amount. So we'd always put 5 to 10% of a contingency. Now, at the moment, the market, the way it is, like, it's kind of gone a bit crazy. So you might go over your 10% contingency, but you go into the thing with your eyes open that this project is going to have a certain amount of cost. Now, we would bring cost consultants on board and all that, and we'd have the whole project like engineered, so we'd know every penny is going to be spent on all these different things. And then you try to manage your costs. So you try to enter into a fixed contract with your contractor or whatever. I mean, you can't manage everything. The big problem that we have in Ireland at the moment, and this is, all the big apartment buildings that are being built, and they're all been done for rental to the big funds and stuff. Yeah. The big problem that's going on at the moment is that the big funds, what they do is they go to a developer like us and they'll say, we'll buy your building for 35 million, whatever, okay? And I say, great, I can build that building for 27 million, so I'm going to make 10 million profit, okay? And then suddenly the costs start creeping up and it's not 27 anymore, it's like it's now 35 or something. Suddenly, your profit is getting compressed down, and it gets to the point where, do you know what? There's actually nothing left in it for us, and so that's what's actually happening at the moment.
And did it happen to you, or did it happen to any
It
of your
hasn't
friends?
happened to us yet, but we have seen people that it is happening to, and so it's a very difficult thing to manage,
Yeah.
because what's happened is, you see, we've had low interest rates for so long that the big funds were out looking for something other than, you know, these really tiny interest rates. If you were like, the European Central Bank was at negative interest for the last couple of years, and so if you had millions sitting in in a big fund like a pension fund or something, you were actually paying the bank to keep the money for you. So for them, if they could find like a block of apartments in Ireland and they could earn 3% or 4% from it, that's a fantastic deal from their point. But now that interest rates are creeping back up, these guys are saying, oh, you know what, we don't need to buy the stuff in Ireland anymore because we can now just leave our money in the bank, or we can buy German bonds or something, and we'll get the same return. And it's much less risky than buying property in Ireland. So suddenly those guys are starting to lose interest. Or if they're still interested, it's at a lower price, because they don't see, you know, the value anymore in the prices that they were paying. So you've got the price coming down that the developer can achieve, and at the same time, you've got the costs going up. And so the developer's profit that he was making is getting squeezed down. And there's going to come a point where it's gone below a certain threshold that you can't accept.
Yeah.
And your bank either will pull the deal, the funding for the deal, or you'll just decide you can't take that risk. You can't run the risk of going into it, because you don't want to do all that work and find that you've actually lost
I
money.
think it'll happen. Won't it? Like, I think it's
Well, I don't think
if the things keep going the way they're going, I don't think there's any other way. Like,
I
with the
think
inflation.
I think that there's guys that are going to get caught. There's no doubt. Like a lot of the professional guys, like the big firms out there, like, you know, Cairn and these, you know, huge companies that are building houses all over the place and stuff. Like, those are very professional people, and they've purchased factories that make the stuff, so they've guaranteed prices because they own the company. They've, like, you know, Ford, they've got all sorts of hedging and stuff like that, so that the price of certain costs remains the same for them. So, you know, when you've got a professional operation like that, you're going to be safe. But some of the other sort of organizations that are less professional, and the guys that have kind of come up in the last 7 years, that it's been real seat of the pants kind of stuff, I think those guys,
They haven't got caught in the previous recession.
this is the thing that happened to me, is like everything's going great, You don't see, there's four things that can catch you out, in my opinion. And I call them the 4 E's, okay? There's the economy. Obviously the economy can kind of, you know, catch you out. Events. So the pandemic was an event that caught all of us off guard, okay? And then there's your emotions. And so you can kind of like sort of say, you know what, I absolutely fall in love with this deal. I absolutely love this deal. Even if the economics are a bit weird, I want to own this property because I grew up in this area or something like that. You know, there's some emotional attachment. Or the fourth one is your ego. And that is where, look, I know what I'm doing. Everything is great. Like, I've made millions in the last couple of years. I'll keep on making millions, which is exactly the mistake that I made back in 2008. And so those are the things. So you always have to say to yourself, you know what, the next deal could be the one that brings us down. So have we fully managed our risk? Are we, you know, conscious of the fact that the price that's been agreed, is that signed? Because one of the silly deals that I did was, I was buying a property and I had a tenant lined up to go into the property. And so I had sent a lease agreement to them, and they just hadn't signed it yet. But they were like, okay, yeah, we'll go ahead with this. And they even sent an architect in to start measuring up the unit. So as far as I was concerned, this was a done deal. So I paid the money and bought the property. And then they pulled out of the deal.
Oh.
And the architect rang me up and says, Gavin, you won't believe, I've just been told, like, to stand down, that the project's cancelled. And they hadn't told me yet. And I was like, huh? What are you talking about? I've just bought the property. And it's like, no, we're not going ahead with the deal. And so I ended up with a property with no tenant. And it took me 12 years to get out of that property, because nobody wants to buy it when it's got no tenant in it.
And could you not find a tenant?
I tried. I mean, I brought...
What kind of property was it?
It
Jesus.
was I'll tell you, it was a property in a working class part of Dublin that was going to be a challenge to rent unless I found a tenant up front to go in, which I thought I did. And then they pulled out, and suddenly you're on your back foot and you're kind of saying, oh God, so we put it out in the market. Nobody expressed any interest. Then I said, you know what? I'll turn it into a hamburger restaurant or something like that. Maybe that'll do better. So I had to go for planning permission, change it to that. Then you put it out there. A guy moved in, started flipping hamburgers. Then the local gurriers came around and started demanding protection money from him. And when he didn't,
That happens in Dublin?
well, yeah. And when the guy wasn't,
What year was this in?
this was 2011 or something like that.
Really?
2000, yeah.
I didn't think that happens still.
Oh yeah, I mean, it depends. Like certain parts of Dublin, this guy anyway, called me up and he just said, "Listen, the young lads are saying that I either pay them or they're gonna, do in basically the customers' cars whenever they pull up." And so that's what they started doing. They started like breaking windows and things like that. And so people stopped coming. And so he said, "Look, I'm not paying these guys, so I have to pull out of the deal." So he walked away. So when we tried to get somebody else in, those guys went in and they stopped paying rent, and it's just such a headache. And so you gotta make sure that you don't make kind of assumptions just because certain things have been done.
Yeah.
I mean,
I can reference that. I was speaking to Joe about this as well. The deal is closed when you have the keys in your hand, because you can relate this to a construction company. I've heard my friends, or even happened to me. Where the client says, "Yeah, this job is going ahead. You can start Monday. You organize your materials. Everything's on the way." Poof! Monday morning they cancel the job. Happens to everybody.
We did it recently, and we had a project team. I mean, and this is not cheap. We have a building that we're refurbishing, and we got the architects and the engineers and the cost consultant, everybody on board, completely designed the thing, massive project. And then we had the builder lined up, and the builder was ready to go on site and all that kind of stuff. And then we were talking to our consultants and stuff, and they said, "Don't think there's going to be anybody to rent this when it's finished, for probably 2 years." And so we just said, you know what? Shelve the entire job. Just park it right now, because the problem is that, and this is what we were talking about, the office market. There's so much space back in the market now because of this work from home, and people have that there's about 18 months of oversupply of the market, and so it's going to be a while before people start moving into new offices and things like that. And you'll just have to wait for people to move into these spaces and for the market, to absorb the overhang in the market there.
It's a pity you can't try to convert them into a housing unit.
The thing is we've looked at that, and the problem is there's planning, but there's also the building itself. It's designed. It's not. Yeah, exactly. It's designed a certain way, and things like the capacity of your lifts and the width of your stair cores and all that kind of stuff. There's distances and for fire certs and all that. It's not an easy conversion, and if you get the building really really cheap, maybe it works. But a lot of the time,
probably cheaper to knock it down and build it new, because I had a guy here, Shane Fleming. He's very good property.
I know Shane. Yeah.
Oh, you know him, yeah. Oh, do you know him personally? Yeah, very well. So he was saying that when they're building those apartments, the regulation on them are crazy. That's why, a lot of people are not building them. That's not.
Yeah, there's two different types of regulation as well. You've got planning permission for rental schemes, and you got planning permission for purchase schemes. And they're two different sets of rules and stuff. Yeah. So if you're going to be renting it, the big pension funds that buy these buildings, when they're buying the building, they buy it and they cannot sell it for 15 years. So it must, you would think to yourself, okay.
Why can't they not sell it?
You see, that's the rule, okay? It's being built for residential rental, okay? And these guys they'll buy it, and it must be as a rental property. It must stay rental for 15 years, minimum. At the end of that, then, if you decided you wanted to, you could sort of sell off individual units, and you could sort of say, put it on the market and sell all the apartments to people who wanted to buy them. But you can't do that at this, you have to...
And is it government or the bank tells you that you can't sell it for 15 years? Because, it aligns perfectly with the agenda of WEF. You will own nothing and you'll be happy. I'm into all that stuff.
The thing is, I'll tell you the thing is what they're trying to do is they're trying to solve the housing crisis, okay? And the problem is building houses. Okay, so I'm building houses at the moment out in Shankill at the moment. Those houses are, houses make money. When you build houses, they make money. When you build apartment buildings, they tend not to make a lot of money. And the reason is because you've got to build a huge building first, okay? You got to put in your lifts, stairs, all the concrete. You got to put in your car parking and everything. they tend to be much, much more expensive. So the money that you make building a house and selling the house, there's a much bigger profit in it than apartments. So
Okay.
whereas when these big pension funds came along, they weren't looking at the individual cost of the units. They were looking at the cash flow from the property, and they were sort of putting a multiple on the cash flow. And they were saying, okay, this we can afford to pay 50 million for this building. Maybe if you were to go and build all the apartments and sell it, you might only be able to sell it for 40 million. So these guys were paying this huge premium because of the cash flow. And now all of a sudden, because of the German interest rates and bonds and all that, and in the ECB, suddenly those calculations have come down. And so now they're saying, we can probably pay about 41 or something like that. And suddenly it doesn't look as attractive any longer.
That's actually, you gave me a big surprise there, because I always thought that if you start building apartments, you'll make way more money because you have this one piece of land. And what could you build on it? Let's say you could put 12 gaffs on it. So instead of that, if you put a big apartment block, you have a lot of more gaffs.
You see, the thing is, there's that is a kind of it's understandable
It's a
why
rookie
people.
mistake.
It's you see, when you get into building apartments and houses and stuff like that, you start to realize that there's a mix, okay? And if you, like, for example, I bought a property in the kind of Cabinteely, Fox Rock kind of an area, okay?
Yeah.
And a really nice area. And it made perfect sense for me to build 4 big, huge houses on it, okay? Build the big 4 houses. Along people would come and pay millions to go and move into those houses. Now, if you go and put that same plot of land in Clondalkin or something like that, you're not going to have people paying for big houses. You'll have people that will pay for like a 1-bedroom apartment or something like that, or a 2-bedroom, it's a completely different kind of mix. Do you know what I mean? And so everywhere you look, every site that you look at has a different type of value, potential. So you might look at something and you might say, right, in this particular area, there's a lot of elderly people. And so it's going to be people moving from the house into, their kids have grown up or whatever, and they want to move into something smaller. So that's your market. You might be in another area that has lots of schools and stuff. So it'll be family homes that they're looking for. And so every market has kind of different. And when you go into an area, you buy a property and you sort of say, okay, what is the perfect mix for this particular area? Now, the planners will usually insist on a certain amount of density, and they'll say something like, you have to put a minimum of 30 units on this, per hectare on this. So that's going to mean that you have to do a certain amount in, say, an apartment scheme or something like that.
Is this an order or a suggestion?
This is the way it is. I mean, there is minimum guidelines on the zoning and stuff. And so when we bought the site, I think it was 32 units or 47 units per hectare. So if it's a half an acre, if it's a half a hectare, it means you have to build 24 or something like that. And you can't build less than that. So you have to figure out, okay, what's the mix going to be to do that? So you might build 3 houses, which you might make a nice profit on, but we're going to have to build, in order to get the other 20, we're going to have to build an apartment scheme or something like that. But it doesn't always make money. You see, when you're building houses, you might build 3, you might say we build 5 houses in a row, and then we sell those, and then we move further into the site, build another 5. So we've got our money back, and now we're putting our money into the next slot. And we do this. With an apartment building, you have to build the entire block, and you can't start selling anything until the entire thing is completely finished.
Well, don't people sell apartment blocks when they're not built yet?
Not really. You see, what you can do is you can maybe look for a reservation and stuff like that,
Yeah.
but you're not going to get money from the bank to pay for anything until you have...
this must be an Irish issue, because when I was following a lot of stuff around the world, there are buildings that went terribly wrong in terms of the way they were building it. So the apartments were sold, especially the top floors, and the building is on a standstill.
I mean, because I lived in Spain for a couple of years, and the way it worked in Spain is you bought property, and you paid stage payments. So I bought an apartment in Spain, and I can remember I put down 10%. And then, a few months later, they'd say, Gavin, we've reached, foundation level. Can you give us another 10%? So you'd send the money off. And then they'd reach another level. And can you send us another 10%? So you're stage paying it. But the thing is you're not getting that from a mortgage. You have to go and you have to get, either you have to pay it cash out of your pocket, or you have to go and say to your bank, say on your main principal home in Ireland, you would say, I need, 100,000 equity release from the property. And what are you going to do with that? Well, I'm going to buy this other property in Spain or something. So, whereas if you went to a mortgage broker or something like that and said, listen, I want to go and, pay 10%, can you give us the money? they wouldn't give it to you because they don't own the land yet. They'll only give you that money when they get the land as security. And while the land is in the ownership of the developer, they don't have any security at all. So that's one of the issues with that. So here in Ireland, you wouldn't be able to do that. You might be able to kind of put down you might sign a contract and you might pay a certain amount over, but you're not going to get 1 cent from a bank until the property is finished and they're getting, basically the title deeds handed over to them as security.
I have another big question here because a lot of guys who are watching us here, their dream is to be a property investor. Now we have a big fish here talking about all the deals, blah blah blah. Would you reckon that anybody could just, because you have an architectural background, right? You went to college, blah blah blah. You know the sauce. Would you reckon that somebody could educate themselves on YouTube from podcasts, listening to guys like you, learning on your mistakes from the knowledge, and then start building up slowly their portfolio?
I think there's a lot to be said for it. The thing is you kind of need a map, okay? Like you can watch lots and lots of podcasts and you can listen to a lot of stuff and you'll definitely pick up a lot of knowledge. But the problem is you don't have somebody to kind of say, you've got everything now, that's all you need to know. And so it might be playing in your head and you might have a lot of knowledge, but it's pulling it together and piecing it together, So people will kind of say, oh, well, I know how to do this, but because they saw a podcast or a video on it or something like that, but they might not realize that there's some other aspect that the guy never mentioned or something like that, So you have to be careful that you don't go out there and make a big financial decision based on 50% of the information or 95% of the information. Like that property that I bought that I lost loads of money on, that like I had 95% of the information. And the 5% that was missing was the fact that they hadn't signed the document yet. And that was enough to sink the entire deal. But I had 95%. Everything else looked perfectly normal. And then that one piece. So that's the bit that you have to be careful about. But like, there's definitely educate yourself.
Yeah. Do you do private coaching, or what does your program look like? Tell us, because there's a lot of, I have personal 5 friends who are watching this. They love property. They will listen to this and they want to know stuff like that.
Well, what I do is I kind of take people through it's a 6-month kind of program, and it's basically really just sort of steering you in the right direction. Okay, so it's first of all you got to get your mindset right, and your mindset is understanding like what we talked about, the resources. Your money, your expertise, your network, your time. It's understanding like what makes most sense for you, because you might be a guy that, say, is a banker, okay? You've got lots and lots of financial knowledge and network and stuff like that. I've a lot of the people that I've worked with are contractors, okay? And they're people that they're working on building sites, and they kind of think to themselves, you know what, I would love to be the client instead of the person working for the client, So they came to me to kind of basically steer them in the direction. And so it's understanding what is the strategy that makes the absolute most sense to you, not what you see other people doing. Because the big mistake people make is, oh, I'd love to be able to do that. But you are a contractor, you've got all of these skills and knowledge and stuff in one area. It makes total sense to kind of use that as the sort of leaping point to start with. The next thing is understanding financial analysis. You've got to look at deals, you've got to be able to kind of financially analyze them and understand exactly how it all works. And then the next thing after that is how to build a portfolio. Because when you're the idea is not just to buy one property, it's to actually become self-sufficient to the point where you've got enough income coming in. One of my clients, or former clients, who's finished now, but he's a really, really smart guy who basically bought a load of properties and did what's known as the HMO strategy. And that's where you take a 5-bedroom house, extend it into a 7-bedroom house and rent it out 1 bedroom at a time. And so you have 7 people living in this place. And you might get $2,000 for the house a month, but you might get $5,000 from the 7 people paying you, And so it makes much more sense to kind of go down that road. So he's done this multiple times. And
it's a headache to me, it's a headache.
it can be a headache, but there's ways to manage that. Like you can actually bring in managers to look after all of the headaches, and you just deal with the construction side. Let somebody else handle all of the phone calls and all that kind of stuff. And then finally, there is, how do you, we only have so much money, okay? You might have your own resources today, but as soon as you buy a property, your resources are pretty much spent, okay? So either you're going to do up that property, sell it and make a profit, and then you can start again and do something else, or you go out and you start meeting with investors. So the final part of my program is how to recruit investors, how to kind of get investors to put
I
money.
might actually join your program.
Well, you're most
I'd love
welcome.
to.
Yeah.
Sounds like the deal for me. Because I tell you, I want to enter the property market in the future, but one thing I don't want to do is start buying smelly 3-bedroom houses and thinking that's going to make me a millionaire, because it ain't.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is I'll tell you one of the big things that I learned about there's commercial property and residential property.
To me, residential is total nonsense, because
Well,
I have friends who do it, and they're not. They're just chasing their tail.
Well, you know what? There's a couple of things to be said for it. First of all, like residential property, it's never going to be empty. You're always going to find a tenant for it. Okay, so there's that aspect. Whereas I found you can spend 12 years trying to get a tenant into a commercial property. Okay, so there's big differences. But if you know what you're doing, like if you buy a property, well, let's say you buy a 3-bedroom property and you go and turn it into a 5-bedroom property and you paint it and you go and put in like brand new, most expensive curtains and carpets and, you know, put in a brand new kitchen and all that. Somebody's going to come along. They're not going to pay you 3 times the price of the property because you put in this fancy kitchen. It is worth what it's worth, plus a little bit extra because of the work you've done. Whereas with commercial property, one of the best deals that I did was I bought this big in Clondalkin. Actually, I've made a lot of deals in Clondalkin. There was a huge big unit, and it was much too big for a retail unit. Normally retail units are about 1,000 square feet. This thing was 4,500 square feet. So the best thing that you could use that unit for would be maybe a carpet showroom or something like that. So what we did is we went in, split it, got permission to split it into 3 different units, and then when the units, I mean, and it didn't take a lot to do that. I mean, you have to put in a separate water supply, you have to put in a separate power supply, you have to put in a separate toilet pipes and stuff because they're going to have their own individual kind of facilities. But after that, that was about it. And then put the thing on the market to rent, and I managed to find 3 tenants to move in to the 3 units, whereas I couldn't find anyone for the big unit. The difference is, if you had gone out to the market, so 4,500 square feet, if you put it on the market and said, I'd like to get somebody, a carpet showroom would come along and say, I'll pay you €10 per foot, maybe, or something like that, you know, and they'd move into it. What I got, because I split it into the smaller units, I was able to get €45 a foot from each of the 3 tenants. So it's now worth 3 times what I paid for the property. And so, because it was valued on the basis of the 10, but because I split it, it was able. That's where you can 3x or 4x your profit. Whereas the residential property, you may not be able to.
It's very little to do. You can convert the attic, you can put on an extension, but that's not going to bring a lot
What
of
you
money.
can do is you can really increase your income, but you can't increase the value massively. Do you know what I mean? Like if you go from earning 20 grand a year or 25 grand a year on a property, and get that up to 50 grand a year, that's really nice for you personally. But you're not going to find that the property is now double what you paid for it. Do you know what I mean? That is because you're basically managing you're actively managing it. And so active management is a good way to kind of increase your cash flow. So imagine if you have 50 properties that you're doing this and you're getting twice the amount of cash flow from it than you would. Then you can suddenly afford to have people that are dealing with all the headaches. You've got a permanent handyman that's kind of going around in a van. You pay for all this stuff and he just looks after all the headaches. Yeah, you got a broken sink, I'll be over in 10 minutes, and it's all sorted. That's the kind of thing you can do when you get it to a certain scale. I have a friend over in the UK, and he started out as I call it an accidental landlord. That's where you buy a property and then you move into another property and you decide, rather than sell your old property, that I'll rent it out. So that's the accidental landlord. And he did that, and then he said, you know what, I like the fact that I'm making this bit of money on this property. So he bought another one, and then he bought another one. And he happened to be a guy that was kind of in the financial sort of sector, so he knew how to get investors. Today, he has about 1,000 properties.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, he's just grown massively. And he's bought estate agents, and he's bought this and that. And so he's just grown it into like a machine.
How long did it take him?
About, at this stage, maybe 10 years at this stage.
10 years is not a long time.
That's what I'm saying.
10 years is not a long time.
Now, the thing is he's smart And so that obviously is a big step, is if you're smart and if you can read the market.
That's something I have to add here to this, because I have spoken to some guys that do the commercial stuff, and they're all extremely clever, and they all talk about how to convert the property, that you have to have your eyes open, you have to watch for this, go to the neighbor, ask them, do this, you know what I mean? So if somebody is maybe, if somebody was working in a standard job for 10 years and then they think they're going to go and do this, your brain might not be up to scratch, with all the stuff that you need to.
Well, there's a couple of different things. First of all, is to do this kind of stuff, you sometimes you need to be a kind of an entrepreneurial mindset.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
1000%.
You're not going to go and sort of go from being an analyst working in a job to suddenly being somebody who's like mover and shaker and doing all this kind of stuff. You might be very good at analyzing, but you're going to need, like, this is one of the aspects of my program is understanding your personality and your strengths and your weaknesses. And there's people out there who are say analysts, okay, and they're amazing at like getting calculators out and working all the kind of, and they know exactly how much the property is going to be worth and all that. But you go and put them into the shoes of, say, a builder or dealing with a builder and stuff, they wouldn't have a clue like what he's talking about. Or they're, in terms of design, they can't design for, to save their lives, and the place looks like a crap hole, So you've got to know what your strengths are, and then you've got to leverage those strengths, and you've got to hire people or bring in like people that can actually help you with your weaknesses. And that is what it is building a team of people that actually fills in those blanks.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people, they're very, very smart in one area.
It's the same thing in business, isn't it? Because you can be great at one area. You could be great at copyright, but you might be bad at sales. You might be great at this, but bad at that. But, if you bring all of those people together into one company, then it all works perfectly, And you can't be afraid that somebody's going to do what you're doing, because even if one of the guys leaves over there, he doesn't have all the other aspects,
That's it. I mean, a salesperson, like I have a good friend who's a salesperson, and he owns his own company. And I was sort of saying, like, when you started the business, like, he went from being the number one salesperson in Ireland in the company he was working. So he was like, I'm going to make a killing. Like, I'm going to make all this money for myself. But he said that in that job, he worked 8 hours a day on the phone selling. He said, you start your own business, you have about 1 to 2 hours a day to sell, and the rest of the day, administration, going organizing the deliveries, all this. So he ended up saying that, like, all the time that he thought he could do what he used to love doing. So until you've found those people to do those other roles, until you have the income and the revenue to actually support those people.
Because it's not easy at the start.
Yeah. That's the thing, and that's why a lot of people take the shortcut of just going out to an investor.
That's why I keep telling people on the podcast, the number, if anybody wants to be doing anything with their life, they should always go on educating themselves in their free time. When I say you should work 14 or 16 hours a day, I'm not saying that you should be there with a shoveling stuff 16 hours a day. Come back after work, spend 4 hours a day on a business course. Listen to a guy like you. This is all education. This is all work to me,
Yeah, I mean, the thing is it can be hard. Like, some people, they work a busy job and all that kind of stuff. And then, the idea of like spending a couple of hours like listening to somebody, lecturing you or whatever. Like, but it is obviously, if you have a hunger for it, you'll do it. And it's the same with, creating content and stuff like that. Like, how much time do you put into like,
So that's a job in itself.
Yeah,
I had to learn all this. Before any of these guys started with me, I was doing all myself, So that's why if any of them leaves, I know how to jump in the chair and do the work. That's the main one, Could you tell me a little bit more about? I'm fascinated about your property training course. What does it look like? So let's say somebody joins it. Is it on Facebook, or how do you do it?
You see, the thing is there's actually people from all over the country. In fact, I've had guys from the UK actually joining it. Okay, I had a builder from the UK on the program in the last group, and it was a 6-month-long program. He joined in, and I asked him at the end. I said, like, is it, did you find it any use to you? Because it's, we're based here in Ireland, and he was like, it's all universal. Like, you could use this anywhere. Do you know what I mean? And that's the thing is it's so you could take it and you could use it like in whatever country. The same principles pretty much apply. Obviously, local laws might change and like building regulations might change, but the principle of how investment works and stuff, it doesn't really change no matter what market you go into.
So basically, do you meet every once and often, or is
what we do is it's a weekly. I do a Zoom call twice a week. Yeah, like definitely once a week, but usually twice a week. And then what we have is there's also kind of an online platform where you can go in and watch additional kind of content and stuff. But you have access to me every single week for basically 24 weeks.
Yeah, because this is probably the most handy part, because if you're getting into this type of work, having a mentor, where you can pull your phone and ring the guy and say, well, listen, Gavin, I'm doing this and this. What would you do? That is probably the most important thing in this type of a business, I would say.
You know what also is useful is that because it's, and you asked asked, do I do private coaching? I don't. And I'll tell you why, is because there's not as much bang for your buck, okay? If you're on a group call with, others, they ask questions. You're learning all the time. Like if somebody is saying, Gavin, I've got this problem here, you're listening to me answering that question. You're thinking, oh, that's interesting. Like I never thought about that as a problem or whatever. So you're learning not just from your problems and the solution, but you're learning from other people in the group, and also other people in the group. Like the last group I had, there was a person who is like professional. There was a contractor. There was actually two contractors in it. Building contractors. Yeah, one from Ireland, actually, and then another guy who was doing stuff down in Cork in timber frame housing and stuff like that. And then there was two contractors. There was a person who is an agent and had a rental business, and so she was doing all that kind of stuff. There was, who else? There's all sorts of walks of life. Do you know what I mean? Different people, and they're in different parts of the country. So the Zoom call really works, but you have different people with different problems and looking at different solutions and stuff. So, like, I always like talking to the builders because a lot of the time they undervalue their skill set. I mean, when you're kind of say, I don't know anything about, financing, and I don't know anything about valuation, and I don't know about this. Yeah, but you know how to build. Like, that's massive. That is like half the battle. If you want to add value to a property, it's almost always going to be done with a bit of construction involved. And if you don't know your way around, if you're not able to pick up the phone and get tradesmen in quickly and to kind of get stuff done and not to get ripped off in the process, then that is really, really valuable. So I say to those guys, you have to kind of say, guys, you've got an incredibly valuable skill. The thing is that you don't realize how valuable it is. And so you're undervaluing yourself. I said, when you're speaking to an investor, he's out there, he doesn't know anything about construction. You've got all of the answers. And so suddenly you're now a partnership that makes sense, as opposed to you thinking, God, I'm going to have to go and get down on my knees and take it from this guy, this investor guy, because he's got all the answers. He doesn't have the answers. He's got the money maybe, but he doesn't have all the answers. And partnering with somebody who's honest and hardworking and all that kind of stuff, that's like you found a piece of gold, basically.
And do you teach how to get investors in your course as well? I
do, yeah. That is part of there's a whole, I have 4 modules, and each module goes on for 6 weeks. Module 1 is your whole mindset thing that we talked about. I call it the roadmap module. Then the next module is financial analysis. Then the next module after that is portfolio building, and it's how to kind of go about constructing a whole portfolio. Some people want income, some people want to flip, all these kind of, it depends really what you're trying to achieve. And then the final one is, the reason I put it at the end is that everyone wants to know how to get the investors. But if you sit in front of an investor and you don't know the other stuff, then you're going to basically turn the guy off very quickly, and you start asking for money when you don't actually have the answers.
I'd say that they're not fools. They can read people.
Well, if you're not able to answer a question, if you don't understand the question, first of all, if you're not able to, if a guy says, okay, what about the yield, or what about what's the net income on that, and you're kind of like, what does net income mean? It's like suddenly you feel all kind of like, you're shaking in your boots and stuff. That sends a signal to an investor that this guy's not ready. Like he's talking a big game, but he actually doesn't know anything about it. So you've got to understand all of the kind of the things that, you got to be able to value a property. You got to understand, like, what's the risk of this property becoming empty? What are the risks? Now, let's list them out. I've got a whole sheet of all the different risks that there is, and there's different categories of risks and stuff. You have to understand that stuff. Otherwise, when an investor asks you about it, you don't know what he's talking about. So that's why I put all that stuff in front, and then we do the investor bit at the end. Because if you put that bit at the front, everyone will be like, okay, I've got everything I need to know, I'm off, and then they go out and the investor won't sort of back them in a deal,
I'd love to move into your mindset part of the podcast, because we spoke about the property, about this and that. It's all great, but you're also a big, motivational guy. You love your exercise. So let's speak about the mindset, and let's start with you telling us, what does your day look like? What do you
My
do?
day.
What time do you wake up? Is it like 4 o'clock extreme guy, or are you like cool?
I'm my friends think I'm extreme, but I don't think I'm extreme. I get up at 5 a.m. 7 days a week.
Wow.
And it starts with I go downstairs and I have a whole kind of a ritual that I do. And
What is it? What is
my,
it? I'm
my
dying to
ritual.
see it.
I'll tell you, it's funny when I say meditation. You might kind of go, "Oh, come on!" Like
I do it every day.
This is the thing. It's
Have
funny.
to do
I
it.
used to think that it was this kind of like woo woo bullshit, but actually it's incredibly valuable. And I've learned to. So I have an app that I use that I basically listen to, and it's telling me that I've done now. I think 204 days in a row. I haven't missed one meditation session in
Well
204 days in a
done.
row. So there's that. And then I have, there's various little things that I have, like,
After, because I don't want to interrupt you, sorry, but after, I don't want to forget this question. Could you tell us what are the benefits of meditation? Maybe people want to know. What is your take on it? We'll finish with your question now.
yeah, I mean, the
Your
thing
routine.
is, my routine. So then there's a book that I got, and and this is another thing where people kind of think, oh, come on, boring. But Stoicism, okay, Stoic philosophy. People talk about this, like I've heard Tim Ferriss and I've heard various people kind of talk about it. And I used to think, oh, come on, this is like, you sound like such a prat talking about this. But actually, when you read the stuff, you kind of go, hold on a second, this makes total sense. And it's preparing your mind for the way the world works, okay? And that is that shit's going to hit you and it's going to hit you hard. And it's how you deal with it that's what it's all about. And so, 2,000 years ago, these guys were writing this stuff and they were on the verge, they might be a rich, wealthy, powerful person, and then the king or the emperor or whatever, like suddenly takes a dislike and he throws them into slavery or something like that. It can change overnight. And so those guys built this thinking patterns around that. And so that's what this is. So I read a passage, it's a book called The Daily Stoic. And that it's 365 pages.
The Daily?
Stoic.
How do-
Stoic. And it's by a guy called Ryan Holiday. And what it is you read that book, you read one page a day. And all it is it's like a half a page. It can be very, very short read, but it's just a little bit of wisdom on the day. So today was, the 18th of January, just went down to page 8, the 18th of January page, read it, and it's talking about some aspect of, life is going to deal you, cards that you don't expect, that you don't want. How you deal with it is entirely in your mind. You know what I mean? You can see this as a disaster, or you can see this as something that is, it's a good thing. We were talking earlier about like the crap that I went through. Was it a disaster, or was it actually the best thing that ever happened to me? That's all Stoicism. It's basically understanding
I
the
love
way
this idea. I love this idea.
Yeah, no, it's really good. That, and then I have this kind of little journal, and so I write in a journal every morning.
How do you?
And yeah,
Goals in the present tense?
I use I have lots of different things that I look at. Yesterday, how did I perform yesterday? How am I performing today? What are my long-term goals? I have lots of different, sort of, there's things like your values. What are your values? What is your purpose? Like, what are you aiming for? What's your mission? Things like that. You can kind of, and some of this sounds a little bit kind of like, ooh, but when you actually start working on it, it actually gives you like laser focus. And when I use my
I keep telling people about it all the time.
yeah, I'm the same. I've got pages and pages written, and so the thing is what's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is so that you have total clarity. So if I'm going through a tough day, if I'm like, kind of like stressed out by what's going on, you could kind of say, you know what, to hell with all this. I'm just going to go down and to the pub and I'm going to go drink. I don't drink. I haven't drank. I haven't touched a touch of alcohol in 8 years now. And I because I was doing an Ironman triathlon at the time, and I kind of was training for it, and I found that having a glass of wine would never be one glass of wine, it would be 2 glasses of wine. And then, oh sure, look, I'll have a third glass of wine, and then you go to bed, and the next morning you can't train. And so I gave up for that purpose, and at the end of 6 months, I said, why would I start again, like just because the event is over? I'm just going to keep going. And so that's what happened. And so the mindset now is that I've just turned 50 years of age in the last couple of weeks. I can do 1,000 burpees in a single session. I'm doing hell and back. I'm doing the next 3 hell and back races and stuff like that. I just love fitness, and I love the ability to kind of perform at a high level from a health point of view.
Well
and it, because it's up there at the end of the day, your ability to handle stress, your creativity, all of it is basically tied to your body and your health and stuff like that. And so part of meditation is tied into that as well. It's like getting yourself still, learning to focus on your breath. And the whole thing is, can you focus on your breath and stop thoughts coming in. And, I'll be there sort of like, listening to my breathing and stuff. And then suddenly I'll go, oh, Jesus, I have to give that guy a call. And then I'll go, hold on. No, back to the breath, back to the breath. And it's the ability to do that. And the more you practice, the more you start to catch yourself during the day getting distracted and stuff. And nowadays with our phones and stuff, like, it's unbelievable. Like, most kids can't like concentrate for more than 5 seconds.
The attention span is gone to, I think it's down to 2 seconds attention span. Look at TikTok. People can decide in 0.3 seconds whether they want to watch it
and
or
you
not.
just have to look at Mr. Beast and the way he makes videos. It's like every 3 seconds there's a cut.
I keep telling guys to be watch this guy. Yeah.
It's all about, attention span. And the thing is you go and give somebody a book now, a teenager a book, they can't read it.
They can't. No, that's the problem. Yeah, I keep talking about it all the time. And it's important to not allow your kids to have this TikTok all the time. Why did they ban TikTok in most of the countries? It actually, not only is it destroying your attention span, and look, some of you probably are going to watch it on TikTok as well. So,
The thing is, it's interesting that Steve Jobs and Bill Gates and all these kind of guys, they never allowed their kids to use the technology because they knew all of the scientists they have working in the back and how to make it addictive. Yeah.
Highly addictive, especially designed for you to be addictive. They even track your pattern of your fingers the way you type. Especially TikTok, yeah. They track all that, yeah.
It's a science, the whole thing. Yeah.
I'm going to drift away from all this stuff and ask you an odd question here. Do you believe in reincarnation?
That is a weird one.
Since you said you're into meditation and all that stuff.
The thing is I don't connect the two together at all.
Oh, do you not?
What I really, I'm very interested in family history, and I've actually tracked I kind of like, I've gone through, there's an app called Ancestry.com, and you can go in and you can track your family history. And I've gone and I've tracked back to my great grandfather.
Oh, no
and I've
way.
actually got photographs of them and stuff like that.
Wait, were they online?
They were online because somebody else had a photograph and they had scanned it and stuff like that. So you can find all this amazing stuff. And so I find that fascinating, but I've never given any thought to reincarnation, to be honest. Like,
Oh, no, the only reason is why I ask, because usually people who meditate, they're into that kind of stuff. You know?
But see, that's why I say when I say people go, oh, woo woo, it's like, it's actually not. It's all about mental performance.
Yeah,
like it's,
yeah. So you use it purely for performance, but there's all the other stuff as well. I read a lot of books on the other stuff. That's why I had to ask that question.
Yeah.
You know, no,
I mean, I don't knock it. It's just something that I haven't given much thought to. You know.
Here's a good question. What would you tell yourself, your 20-year-old self? Any advices you would give him? What would you do? Like, if there's a 20-year-old Gavin sitting
It's
there.
funny. That's a question that I ask my guests on my podcast. So it's
Oh,
something
really?
that, it's funny to have it the tables turned. I'll tell you what I would do is I would try to convince myself, and I probably wouldn't have listened, but I would try to convince myself to get into reading this Stoicism, because once you get it into your head, you start to realize that there is stuff that's going to happen in your life that is horrible, that is not going to be planned. It's not going to be something that you would ever wish to happen to you.
Your parents can die. This can happen. Three of these things can happen in one day.
All of this can happen. And the thing is the only thing that you have going for you is your ability to think and react to it. It's like there's stuff that you have control over, okay? If you think about, there's a dot in a bullseye, okay? You are the bullseye. Your mind is the bullseye, okay? And then there's a circle around it. And the first circle is you and your body, basically, okay? And most people would say, I have full control of my body. And you'd be right to a degree. But what if you got cancer tomorrow or something like that? Do you have control over that? Can you stop yourself from getting sick? Can you stop yourself from getting unhealthy? Can you stop yourself from getting knocked down by some drunk driver or something like that? No. So you don't have total control. Then there's one outside that is your family, your children, your wife, or your spouse, or whatever. All of that kind of stuff is something that you can influence, but you can't absolutely control it. And then beyond that is the great kind of, everyone else. And you have absolutely no control over that, nor do anyone give a shit about your, what you think and all that kind of stuff. And people go out there and they think, oh, I can't do this, can't make this video, can't make this podcast. What would people think? Most people are so caught up in their own mind, they don't give a crap what you have to think about it and stuff. But what you think about your own, what you have control over, you have control over almost nothing. But how you react to what happens to you, that's what you can control. And so if like you're sitting in traffic, you can kind of think to yourself, this is a disaster, like I need to be somewhere. Or you can say, you know what, this is actually great. I can turn on my favorite podcast, Irish Success, and I can listen away, and I've made use of this time. All it is perception. How do you look at it? How do you think about it? And it's the same with pretty much anything, you know. And a loved one dies. I mean, that is not something that you're going to take, you know, easily.
Unless you believe in reincarnation.
Yeah, and I mean that's one way to look at it. And the other way though is that, you know, you have to kind of say to yourself, there is at some point bad things happen, and you have to learn to be able to deal with it. And if you kind of say to yourself, okay, would that loved one would they be proud of how I'm behaving right now? You know, there's a kind of, are you worthy? You're going to be challenged in your life. Are you worthy of that challenge? Are you going to stand up and you're going to take it, or are you going to fall over and be a victim? And this is kind of where Stoicism kind of comes from. So had I gone through that, I might have not let a bit of success get to my head. I might not have allowed myself to kind of start thinking that I'm Mr. Universe and I can do anything. And I might have been a little bit more careful. I might have put away some additional money and, you know, maybe not gone on those huge, big, risky deals and stuff. Because I got a bit addicted to making deals and stuff. And, you know, when I look back and I kind of think to myself, here's me blaming everyone else. That was why I went through what I did, because I was addicted to it and I just like couldn't have it. I couldn't stop myself. You know, I put money. I'll give you a little. I put money on the stock market. I put 100 grand into a thing called a CFD account. Okay, CFD is where you're margin trading, and so you put in 100 grand, you can buy €1 million worth of shares. Okay, so I put 100 grand in, bought a load of shares. 6 months later, my 100 grand was worth 850 grand. Okay, I made 750 grand in 6 months. I was like, you know, and I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to wait until it's $1 million, then I'm going to sell it all, and then, you know, I'm going to be done. And what will I do? I'll buy myself a nice Porsche 911 or something like that. You know, that's what was going on in my head. Market turned, started going down. Did I sell? No, I'll wait for it to go back. Went down further. Oh no, I'll wait for it to go back. Went down further. Wait for it to go back. It ended up going negative 150. And I ended up saying, okay, get me out. And at that stage, I lost 250 grand. And I was like, do you know what? This is the thing. And it's like, why did I do that? Because my mind, you know, it's like ego gets in your head and you start to, and emotions. And that's
but I
why.
suppose there's no good way to say, oh, Jesus, I did a bad thing or I did a good thing. But how could you predict that? You know, I mean, it was down to the goal that you set for yourself. You wanted 100. You know?
But that's the thing is like, rather than, yeah, this is where so many people in crypto and stuff, they've gotten themselves burned. They all thought that they were like, I've heard like that things like, you know, Rolls Royce and, you know, Rolex watches and all this kind of, there's like a glut of them on the market now because people who thought that they were multi-millionaires suddenly have no money, like because FTX collapsed or whatever.
Patrick Bet-David talks about it on his podcast. He said that there's the Ferraris and everything, even the rare ones are up on the market now again.
Yeah, and that's so many people have been burned. And because why? Because they didn't think that the market was going to make a turn. And there's one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is cognitive bias. And there's all these cognitive biases that you have to be really aware of.
Could you elaborate on this?
So there's a thing called continuity bias, okay? And that is what we've all experienced now is the market is going up, up, up. Interest rates are low. Everything is going great. The market is roaring away. You are of the view that it's going to continue roaring away. That is continuity bias. It is the bias against the whole market turning, collapsing tomorrow morning and it happening like that. So if you are not aware that you've got continuity bias, that you're not even factoring in the fact that some event could happen. Like I was in Barbados on the first day that the 9/11 attacks happened in 2001, and I can remember turning on the TV. Next minute, there's a plane like with smoke coming out of the Tower 1, and and then I watched live as the second tower was hit by a plane, and I was kind of going, "Oh my God, it's a terrorist attack." The markets collapsed like instantly. The whole market like collapsed because they saw this was a terrorist attack. Nobody predicted that. So you're sitting there with this, you know, huge like, you know, bets on like, you know, crypto or something like that, and some event like that could happen, but people have continuity bias that, oh no, the market's going to keep roaring away. And so that's a big risk. That's just one. There's I mean, there's so many different ones. It's like, where do you begin? But there's another one. Like, if you were sitting here, say you're sitting in a cafe and you're overhearing a conversation, and it's Elon Musk or something like that, and he's talking about, I'm going to go and buy a load of shares in this company, and it's going to make millions, okay? And you're overhearing this, going, geez, straight onto the, stock market, and I'll go and buy those same shares, okay? It's like authority bias, okay? It's he is somebody that you respect, and you kind of think he has all the answers, and so I'm going to listen to him and I'm going to take his advice. Now, if you walked out on the street and on the way to your car, the bin man was like, emptied the bins and said, you know what you should do? You should go and buy these shares. You'd be like, get the hell out of here. How would you know anything? You're a bin man, okay? Same piece of advice, very different perception as to who gave it to you. But it's the exact same piece of advice. So why do you take that? It's because the authority bias. And so you got to be very careful about that. The best way to look at it is, don't automatically assume that he might have a negative motivation. He might be thinking, let's talk like this so that everyone hears it, and they'll all go and buy it, and it'll pump up the price, and I'll offload mine into the rising market.
A lot of that is happening on the internet.
That's the thing, pump and dump schemes and all this kind of stuff, And the YouTube is filled with all these like finance guys that are talking about it, and they were guilty of it as well,
Yeah. Gavin, could we jump into, give us a couple of your favorite books? Because everybody has minimum of 5, If somebody asked me for my favorite 5, I'd give them 50.
Well, it's funny, the first one that pops into mind is the one that I'm looking behind your head, and Never Split the Difference is
Joe kept looking at that one as well yesterday.
That is a great book.
And it's not a big read as well.
It's great. It's Chris Voss. In fact, I was in a mastermind group that Chris was in. And,
no way. Where was that?
It's in Toronto. It's but so that's one. There's a guy called Jocko Willink, and Jocko is.
Hold on, I'm gonna write this because I want to put them on my Audible when you say it.
Sure. So Jocko Willink, and he has he's a former Navy SEAL. He's a real hard ass kind of.
What book did he write?
He wrote a book. He wrote a few books, but the one Extreme
Ownership.
Oh, yeah,
I know that book. Yeah,
that's Jocko, and his partner Leif Babin. And then what else? I like the David Goggins book.
Can't Hurt Me.
Can't Hurt Me.
I read it as well.
Let me see. There's a couple like this. Like I'm.
Could you tell me what the extreme ownership? Because a lot of people that I spoke to, they kind of gave up after the first or the second. What would you say that the biggest lesson in that book is? Let's just give it to people in a couple of sentences.
I think the thing is with like if you go back to. It all boils back to you taking ownership for the situation you're in instead of trying to blame somebody else, and that's what it all boils down.
Responsibility.
Take responsibility. Like I could have gone on. I went on this bit of a rant blaming Lehman Brothers, and then it was the effing banks in Ireland, and it was this, and it was only when things are just getting worse and worse and worse. Why? Because I'm a victim, and I'm blaming other people rather than taking ownership and saying, you know what. You are to blame for your own situation, and you're not going to blaming other people is not going to get you out of this. You're going to get yourself out of it when you stop blaming other people and take ownership, and that's what it boils down to.
This is a good quality of a good leader and a manager. I employ a lot of managers because I've also different gigs, so every gig has its own manager. But if a manager comes back to me and says to me, "No, because this and this and this," I fire him.
Right.
I fire him, because he's not responsible. What you mean? So you never taught him to do that way, and that way you're supposed to be the guy in charge, So I'd say that's one of the most important skills in business and in any CEO kind of a job or a company. Would that be right? Yeah,
I think you're right. What else? One of the books that really caught my attention at the time was The 4-Hour Workweek by
Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss. I remember reading that book and going, "Oh my God!"
Joe was laughing at that book yesterday when he was here.
Yeah. The thing is it's the principle of I see so many young guys now doing it. I was talking to one just the other day, and he's living in Australia, but he has a business that is basically selling. Search engine optimization to clients all over the place, and so he's able to go and travel the world and do. So he's basically doing what Tim Ferriss suggested in that thing, and the concept of doing that was completely like, new back in the day. And I think we're heading in that direction. I mean, something that really fascinates me is this chat GPT that's happened now and artificial intelligence. I mean,
Gonna be big.
big time. I've been, you know what it
Have
is?
you watched the video of Alex Hormozy talking about this?
Yeah, I actually did. And the funny thing is, I actually did a podcast on it just for my own channel just the other day. And we were talking about this stuff. And I was saying, do you know, I can remember these moments in time. Okay. I remember getting my first mobile phone. And I can remember, like, suddenly you're on the phone and you're talking and it's like, this is amazing. Do you know what I mean? I can remember, like, my first computer. I can remember, I was telling my daughter this morning on the way to school, I was saying, when I was your age, like she's 6, and when I was your age, there was the TV didn't have a remote control. Like, you would actually, my dad would be like, Gavin, go over and change the station. So I'd have to walk over to the TV, and there was like, I think there was six buttons, and that was it, and you would push it and you push it in like to the TV. And I was saying, and like, and I said, and then, around about the 1980s, VCR came out, and you went to the shop and you rented a video. And she's like, what's a video? And I was explaining, like, you used to go down, the way you've got your Netflix and you can watch whatever movie you want, whenever you want. He said, that wasn't the way it was. He said, you had to watch whatever RTE or BBC put on the TV. That was it. That was your only choice. And she's like, what? And she didn't understand all this.
I'll tell you a quick funny story here. There was back in my village where I came from, right? I remember, and this is a story from my parents, so they bought the first TV, blah, blah, blah. And halfway through the day, there was this sign on the TV which just said break. So they would be sitting there and just watching the break because it was such a new thing.
Yeah, that's funny actually. When you watch RTE online using through the app, they have this bit where it just stops and plays music, and that's because they're playing ads on the television thing, and they need to create that break. Yeah, but I don't know. I can't watch TV anymore. Like, I've just gotten so used to
whoever
on
can't
demand.
watch TV. That's how I know they're the true warrior. Because when I watch TV, I literally get it's like somebody stabbing me in the back. All the bullshit I hear, and when the commercials go on, that's the worst part.
Yeah.
This is a tablet. You need this before they go to sleep. Oh, you need this. You know what I mean? All processed crap.
It's just getting you to buy stuff. It's pushing buttons.
Yeah, I don't think anyone look. Do whatever you want. You know what I mean? But whoever wants success in life, TV, there's no room for it.
Yeah.
Joe said it yesterday. Do you know what he said? He will not stand in the same room where there's EastEnders playing. And his missus watches EastEnders. I think it was EastEnders.
EastEnders. Oh, there's Coronation Street.
I
EastEnders,
think
all
he said
this stuff.
EastEnders. He said he refuses to be in the same room. So he whenever this goes on, he just stands up and he goes to another room.
I'm the same. I
such a legend.
I couldn't watch it at all. It's funny. Yeah, no. Over the years, I just that was an absolute no.
Yeah, I think programs people as well. That's what the meditation helps as well. It puts you on a completely different path.
I used to call the likes of Coronation Street and EastEnders, I used to call it the depression session.
Yeah.
Because it's always like some story of, what's going on? What's the latest scandal? This, that, the other. And I never was interested. I never got into it. But like, I'm not the typical person.
So when would you? Sure, you were working mad hours, Well, how many hours a day would you say you're working these days? Because you're in your 50s now. This is probably time to slow down, but people usually don't. Slow down.
The thing is if you're a kind of person that wants to slow down, well, then that's a different story. But personally, it's the grind kind of. I enjoy the grind. So, sometimes I'll be in the office till 10 o'clock at night. You know what I mean? I don't. It's the nights that I'm doing the coaching and stuff like that. I'll just stay late in the office, because I'm talking to people and stuff like that. I like to get home early, to see the kids and stuff like that when I can. But I kind of mix it up. I don't really like to have kind of like I like my morning routine to be there. But if I get to bed too late, then I'm going to find that the next morning I'm struggling. Like, I do a hard workout from about 6 to 7. And if you've got, a bad sleep, that's going to be a challenge, So I like to get a decent night's sleep. So I try to get to bed by about 10:30, 11 o'clock. Otherwise, 5 a.m. is going to be a tough call.
No.
And the thing is athletic performance, like one of the actual disciplines is sleep. If you don't get enough sleep, you're actually not going to have optimal sort of athletic performance, at the end of the day. And it's about having a rounded ability. You know, it's not just your brain and, you know, working hard and stuff like. It's having the full package to be fit, healthy, have a strong immune system.
Yeah,
You know?
because what's the point of having all the success and money if you're gonna be 50, 60 on your, on your knees?
Well, that's exactly it. And you look at the likes of
And I love the fact that you don't drink. You know, I love that.
Well, I mean, like there's also
Helps.
yeah. I mean, the thing is it's just if you've watched your dad die at 45 years of age, then health becomes a big issue. Do you know what I mean? And
Do you mind me asking, was the alcohol related to it?
it was part of it. Yeah, it was related to lifestyle decisions over the years and stuff, and basically catching up with them. And so that was a very
I don't know, how is alcohol legal? Like, did you ever
Yeah.
try to wrap your head around that? Like, they're telling us that weed is bad for you, but the fucking alcohol? Like, it really, I've seen alcohol destroying relationship, businesses, marriages.
But listen, all of the vices do that. Like, I mean, you've got
Nothing on that scale. What destroys more on that scale?
well,
That's
you know
legal?
what's worse is gambling, because you can be a gambler and you can like nobody will see the outside, like, you know, you're showing up for work perfectly every day and everything like that, and then suddenly you've lost the family home and your kids are now out in the street. And what do you know? This is the problem is that nobody knows until it's too late with gambling. With and like the worst thing about it is when people hit that rock bottom that they thought that they were going to double their money or whatever, a lot of the time they'll take their lives and that's it. Like they've checked out, but they've left the family, like, you know, lying on the street. Like so that is probably worse, because at least if you're an alcoholic and you're drinking and people can kind of try to intervene and try to prevent, you know, stop you,
But there's
dry
no
you
cure
out.
for gambling.
There's no cure. Well, there's a cure for gambling.
Unless you want to be cured,
losing all your money, basically.
Yeah. For alcohol, there's different things. You know, you can get this thing under your skin where they implant a couple of tablets under your skin, and then you can't
Yeah.
drink or you die.
Like there's a lot of mental health issues out there, and I think people are only just starting to kind of come around to it. And one of the big problems is that it's okay, like, and this is not a sexist comment, but it's kind of society that deems it's okay for a woman to say that, you know, she's depressed or she's, you know, sort of dealing with something. But for guys, it's kind of like you're expected to kind of like tolerate it and, you know, come on, be a man, like, you know, sort of. So men tend to bottle up any kind of emotional issues they have, and it becomes too much for them, and then they'll actually, you know. And
Do you know the statistics? Who makes? Who is there more suicides on the male or the female side? I wonder.
Well, the different reasons for suicide, you know, a lot of the time men, it's financially related, and it's because they're unable to, you know, like they've lost everything or something like that. And like when you saw in 2008, like people had been, you know, driving Rolls Royce and Bentleys and taking helicopters everywhere and first class travel and stuff, and then suddenly, oh, not only is that going to stop, but you're actually broke. The amount of people that like they checked out because of that, you know. It's because they tied their entire identity around it. You know, it's like that guy, the rich guy.
So that's why this book should be the #1 book. I'm gonna make sure I do read it.
Yeah, it's really
The Daily Stoic.
it's just a little bit of daily wisdom, basically,
Yeah,
to
you
kind
need
of
to
like
ground yourself, because you need to be prepared for stuff, you know.
That's so true, and I mean it's 2,000 years old. I mean, so it's like it still makes sense today, 2,000 years later. You know, so.
Gavin, I think we covered a lot. We're going to wrap up in a few seconds. I just want to remind all the listeners, follow Gavin on Instagram and TikTok. He's very alive on TikTok. You're there all the time giving your tips. And I love your TikTok page because it's not just some bullshit. You're always giving some tips, you know. So I actually have you in my favorites. So whenever I go on TikTok, I see you now, you know. So follow Gavin. How do we find you on TikTok?
I'm the same for everything, Gavin J Gallagher. And if you just type in Gavin J Gallagher, pretty much everywhere I'll pop up.
Well done. Thank you for meeting me here. Thank you guys for listening.
Being a big pleasure. Thanks.
That was cool. That was cool. That was one of my best podcasts.